This is the story of something that happened deep in the woods, something that still lived quietly in the shadows of memory, waiting for a breeze or a sound to stir it awake. It began on a cool, dry autumn afternoon when four friends, Jake, Mia, Aaron, and Noah, set off for a weekend camping trip in Ravenwood Forest, a thick patch of wilderness on the edge of town that had long been the subject of warnings and whispered legends. The locals often spoke of the place with unease, telling strange stories about shadows that moved without light and whispers that drifted through the trees at night. But to a group of teenagers with more curiosity than caution, the forest seemed like the perfect escape from boredom. With sleeping bags strapped to their backs, snacks stuffed in bags, and laughter filling the air, the group made their way into the woods, brushing off every tale and warning they had ever heard. The trees grew thicker as they went deeper, their trunks tall and ancient, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. The deeper they walked, the quieter it became. By the time the sun began to dip low behind the hills, casting a golden glow, through the branches they had found a small, flat clearing surrounded by thick trees. It was the perfect place to set up camp. A circle of rocks was already arranged like someone had once used it for a fire pit, though it looked long abandoned. They pitched their tents with easy laughter, shared a quick meal, and watched the sun disappear entirely, leaving the forest cloaked in a heavy darkness. The fire flickered to life with a soft crackle, giving them a sense of comfort. For a while, the air was filled with the sound of roasting marshmallows, silly jokes, and the soft pop of burning wood. They began sharing scary stories around the fire, half laughing and half trying to spook one another, never imagining that they were about to become part of one. But then something strange happened. The forest, alive just moments before with the rustle of animals and the soft chirping of crickets, suddenly went completely silent. No wind, no bugs, no night birds, just a strange, pressing stillness that wrapped around the clearing like a blanket. The laughter faded, and one by one, the friends noticed the unnatural quiet. Jake was the first to speak, nervously saying it was probably nothing. Maybe the animals had gone to sleep. But Mia's face was tense, her eyes scanning the trees. Aaron moved closer to the fire, as if its light could protect him. Noah stood slowly, trying to peer through the thick darkness beyond the trees. It was then, through the stillness, that a sound broke the silence. A slow, dragging sound. Not like footsteps, but like something being pulled across the forest floor. It came from just beyond the edge of the firelight, behind the trees, where only shadows lived. The sound continued, steady and slow. Drag, step, drag, step. The kind of sound that makes a person's hair stand on end, though they can't explain why. Jake forced a laugh and said it was probably a deer, or maybe an old tree creaking. But no one responded. Everyone was frozen, their eyes locked on the dark space beyond the light. The fire crackled louder, as if reacting to the tension in the air. Mia clutched her coat tighter, her voice barely a whisper as she asked if anyone else had heard that. Everyone nodded. The sound stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. No dragging, no movement, not even the rustle of leaves. The forest was dead still. Then, all at once, there was a loud snap, like a branch breaking under pressure. Mia jumped. Aaron took a step back. Jake reached for the flashlight in his bag but fumbled with the zipper, his hands shaking just slightly. Noah, eyes still locked on the darkness, saw something. For the briefest second, between the flickers of firelight, a tall shape stood at the edge of the clearing. It was thin, its limbs long and stiff, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, almost as if it were broken. No face could be seen, no color or features, just a black outline standing in the trees. And then, it was gone. The shape vanished the instant the fire cracked and sparked upward, as if it had never been there. Noah's breath caught in his throat. He turned toward the others, his voice hushed but serious, and asked if anyone else had seen it. Mia's eyes were wide, and she nodded slowly. There was something there, she whispered. Aaron and Jake said nothing, but their silence was answer enough. The laughter from earlier was long gone, replaced by an uneasy tension that gripped the group like cold fingers. They stayed close to the fire, unwilling to speak much after that. The trees loomed around them, tall and unmoving. The silence returned, heavier than before, wrapping the forest in a strange stillness that didn't feel like nature's rest. It felt like a warning. The group didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made them flinch. Every gust of wind felt like breath on the back of their necks. And even though no one said it aloud, they all knew something wasn't right. Ravenwood Forest was supposed to be a fun getaway. But that night, under the gaze of old trees and unknown eyes, it felt like something else entirely. Something had seen them. Something had come close. And something was still out there. The fire had burned low, casting longer shadows that stretched and danced along the forest floor, moving like silent ghosts around the tents. Every branch that cracked, every leaf that rustled, felt heavier than it should have, as though the forest had become aware, listening, watching. The strange dragging sound had stopped, but its echo remained in the air, pressing down on the group like a thick fog of fear. Jake tried to joke again, something weak about a raccoon on crutches, but his voice betrayed him, too high, too quick. No one laughed. Aaron stood rigidly by the fire, eyes flicking between the trees, his flashlight gripped tight in one hand but still off, as if he were afraid that turning it on would reveal something no one was ready to see. Mia wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, trying to stay calm, her breath showing in soft puffs as the night grew colder. The wind had died completely, yet the leaves in the trees whispered with a sound that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then came a second noise, different from the first. It was a soft clicking, like fingernails on bark, slow and purposeful. It circled the clearing, never stepping into the light, always just beyond it, as if teasing them. Noah stepped forward, trying to pierce the darkness with his eyes, but the firelight ended too abruptly, swallowed whole by the trees. He turned to the others, his voice low and serious, suggesting they pack up and leave. No one argued. Hands moved quickly, too quickly, shoving sleeping bags and snacks into backpacks. Fear made the movements clumsy. Zippers got stuck, straps twisted. The fire was left to die on its own as they turned and started walking back the way they thought they had come. But the trail, which had been clear just hours ago, was now unfamiliar. Trees had shifted. Fallen logs blocked paths that hadn't been there before. Even the stars above seemed to have dimmed, their light failing to guide the way. The forest was different now, alive in a way that didn't feel natural. Every branch looked like it reached a little closer. Every shadow stretched just a little, too far. The sound returned. Drag, step. Drag, step. Soft but constant. Somewhere behind them. Always just out of sight. No matter how fast their feet moved, the sound never faded, always matching their pace. It wasn't chasing them. It was following. Tracking. Noah glanced over his shoulder once and thought he saw something crouched low between two trees, but when he blinked, it vanished like a smudge in the corner of the eye. He kept walking. Jake tried to say something encouraging, but his voice cracked. The forest, once silent, now filled with subtle noises that didn't belong, whispers that shifted from ear to ear, like voices underwater. Faint laughter echoed. Ahead of them, distant but clear, and far too childlike for the middle of the night, a giggle followed by a sharp snap. The path opened suddenly into another clearing, but this one felt wrong. The air was colder, thicker. In the center stood an old wooden structure, half buried in vines and rotting leaves. It looked like a cabin, but its roof was sagging, the windows broken, and the door crooked on rusty hinges. No one wanted to go inside, but standing in the open felt worse. The group hesitated only a moment before stepping onto the creaking porch and pushing the door, open with a groan that echoed like a scream. Inside, the air was sour, thick with mold and something else, something metallic and old, like dried blood and forgotten things. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. The fireplace was clogged with ash, and the walls were covered in carvings. Strange symbols, jagged and looping, dug deep into the wood as though someone had clawed them with desperate fingers. Mia stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. On the floor were small handprints, dozens of them. Tiny, dirty, handprints stained into the wood, as if left behind by children. But the fingers were too long, too many, curling like roots from a dying tree. Jake backed away toward the wall, his breath catching. A loud creak came from above, the attic. All heads turned to the ceiling at once. The cabin was supposed to be empty, abandoned, but something moved above them. Slow, deliberate. Each step, sending down another creak. It wasn't pacing, it was approaching. Noah reached for the attic hatch, but Aaron grabbed his arm and shook his head. No one wanted to know what was up there. The sound stopped. Silence. And then, with a long, dragging noise, the attic door began to open on its own. The group stared, in horror as long, pale fingers curled around the edge, followed by a face peering down, though it was barely a face. Hollow sockets where eyes should be. Skin stretched too thin, its head tilted in the same broken way Noah had seen earlier in the woods. It began to crawl down, not walk, not climb, crawl, like a spider, limbs bending the wrong way. They didn't speak. They didn't scream. They ran. Out the door, into the night. Branches tore at their clothes. Something followed, faster now. The woods, alive with whispers and laughter, opened like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. The sound was louder, drag step, faster than before, as though it had grown impatient. Still, they ran, tripping, gasping, but never stopping. The forest closed in around them, paths twisting into dead ends, trees forming walls. The clearing vanished behind them. The cabin disappeared from sight. Only fear guided their feet now. The night had swallowed them whole. They stumbled, breathless and wild-eyed, through the dense forest, the trees pressing in on all sides like dark sentinels. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the very ground beneath their feet was sinking deeper into something unnatural. The creature had not stopped chasing them. No matter how fast they ran, no matter how many turns they made, its dragging footsteps were always behind them. Drag. Step. Drag. Step. It was relentless, patient, like it had all the time in the world. The woods felt like they were closing in, the trees towering over them like silent giants, their twisted branches reaching out like hands eager to catch them. The deeper they ran, the darker it became, and the light of the moon, once so bright, was now little more than a faint glow filtering through the thick canopy above. The ground was uneven, thick with roots and rocks that caught their feet, sending them crashing to the forest floor more than once. But each time they fell, they forced themselves back to their feet, their limbs aching, their hearts pounding in their chests, not daring to stop for fear of what might catch them. Mia was the first to break, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs trembling. She had run so far, so fast, but the exhaustion was catching up to her. Her head spun, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to tilt, the trees spinning like a carousel. She barely managed to catch herself before collapsing. Aaron, who had been running beside her, grabbed her arm, his face twisted in fear. "We can't stop!" he shouted, his voice shaking. "We have to keep going!" But Mia's eyes were wide with terror, her gaze darting over his shoulder. She was too scared to speak, too terrified to move. Noah turned to see what she was looking at, and his heart dropped into his stomach. The creature was close, closer than it had ever been. Its pale, twisted form emerged from the shadows, crawling along the forest floor with unnatural speed. The thing's limbs moved at impossible angles, bending the wrong way as it dragged itself toward them, its long fingers leaving deep gouges in the earth. Its head, tilted at a disturbing angle, swiveled toward them, empty sockets glowing with a faint, sickly light. It had no eyes, yet it saw them. Noah's mind raced. What was it? Where had it come from? The questions flew through his mind, but there was no time for answers. The creature was nearly upon them. He grabbed Mia by the shoulders, shaking her. "Get up! We have to move!" But Mia didn't respond. Her eyes were vacant, her body frozen in place, as if some unseen force had rooted her to the spot. Panic surged through Noah, and without thinking, he pulled her roughly to her feet. Aaron, still holding tight to her arm, helped drag her along. As Noah led the way, stumbling through the darkness, barely able to see anything ahead of them. Every step felt like a mistake, like the forest itself was conspiring against them, pulling them deeper into its heart. The trees seemed to close in around them, the branches twisting and creaking as if alive, their gnarled fingers reaching out to grab them. The sound of dragging grew louder, closer, and more urgent. Noah could hear the thing's breath now. A low, guttural wheeze that came from deep within its chest, like the sound of something dying. The footsteps were no longer slow and deliberate. Now they were fast, frantic, as if the creature was desperate to catch them. It knew they were close. Noah's heart raced. He couldn't outrun it. No one could. But he couldn't stop, couldn't let it catch them. Ahead, a faint light appeared through the trees, a shimmer of hope in the otherwise pitch-black wilderness. A cabin. It had to be the same one they had seen earlier, the one they had fled from in terror. But now, it was their only chance. "There!" Noah shouted, pointing toward the light. "The cabin! We can hide there!" Aaron didn't hesitate. He pulled Mia along, and the three of them sprinted toward the cabin, barely aware of the trees, scraping against their skin. Behind them, the dragging footsteps grew louder, closer. The creature was almost there. With one last burst of energy, they reached the cabin and threw open the door, slamming it shut behind them just as the first clawed hand scraped against the wooden frame. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The smell of mold and mildew stung their noses, but they didn't care. The door had been locked, but it wouldn't hold for long. They needed a plan. They needed to escape. The cabin was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. The walls were covered in strange carvings just like before, and the floor was littered with debris. Noah turned, searching for something, anything that could help them. That's when he noticed the odd markings on the walls, carvings that weren't there before. The same symbols, but this time they were different. These were not random but deliberate, like a ritualistic pattern, a warning. The markings on the floor caught his attention next. Fresh handprints, not old and faded like before, but new. Blood-red handprints smeared across the floor, leading toward the back of the cabin. Without thinking, Noah moved toward the back, Aaron and Mia following hesitantly. The air grew colder as they approached the door at the rear of the cabin, a wooden door that seemed to have been hidden from view. The door creaked when Noah touched it, sending a chill down his spine. He pushed it open slowly, his breath held in anticipation. On the other side, a staircase led down into the darkness. The walls of the staircase were lined with more carvings, more symbols, more blood-stained handprints. The air was thick with the scent of decay. They had no choice. They had to go down. Mia's voice broke the silence, her words barely a whisper. "What is this place?" Noah didn't have an answer. All he knew was that something had been waiting for them, and they had walked right into its trap. The stairs creaked under their weight, groaning with a sound that felt too loud in the oppressive silence of the cabin. Each step they took seemed to echo throughout the narrow, pitch-black space below them. The air was thick, suffocating, heavy, with the stench of rot, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. Mia's hand shook as she clung to Noah's arm, her breath shallow and quick. Aaron, only a step behind, could feel the hair on the back of his neck rising. Something was wrong here. It wasn't just the fear gnawing at their insides. There was a presence, an unnatural weight pressing on them from all sides. The deeper they descended, the colder it became, until it felt as though they were no longer in the forest, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere lost to time and reality. The darkness seemed to close in on them, a living thing that refused to release its grip. Noah led the way, his flashlight now the only source of light, though it barely cut through the dark. The beam trembled in his hand, casting erratic shadows on the stone walls. The staircase wound downward in a spiral, leading them deeper into the earth. With each twist, they passed more carvings, more symbols etched into the stone, their meaning too obscure to decipher, but too deliberate to ignore. The markings were old, worn, but the bloodstains, fresh and dark, seemed to pulse, as though they had been left mere moments ago. As they reached the bottom, the air grew even heavier, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, as if the walls themselves were bleeding. The room they entered was vast, the ceiling high and arched, yet the space felt impossibly claustrophobic. There were no windows, only the dim light of the flashlight catching on strange objects scattered around the floor, jars filled with thick, viscous liquids, broken tools, tattered fabrics, and the remnants of something far darker. Mia recoiled at the sight of a large, twisted figure lying in the center of the room. Its shape was unclear, covered in layers of rotting cloth and shadow, but there was no mistaking the presence of something unnatural. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything familiar. It was something else. A low growl rumbled from the corner of the room. Noah's heart skipped a beat, and before he could react, something large and dark moved swiftly across the floor, a hulking shadow that crossed the beam of his flashlight for just a second. Its eyes, bright, unnatural, glowed in the darkness like twin embers. Mia screamed, stumbling backward into Aaron, who caught her before she could fall. Her breath came in frantic gasps, her voice rising in terror. "It's not alone! It's not just one!" Aaron's grip tightened on her, and he turned to Noah, his eyes wide. "What is it? What the hell is going on?" Noah didn't have an answer. He only had the nagging feeling that this place, this room, was wrong in ways they couldn't comprehend. The air felt alive with movement, with eyes watching from the shadows. And then the whispers started. Faint at first, low and indistinct, as though the very walls themselves were speaking to each other in some language they could never understand. The words were unintelligible, but their tone, menacing, mocking, was clear. A laugh echoed through the room, high-pitched and shrill, cutting through the whispers like a blade. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything that should be alive. Something shuffled in the corner, and from the depths of the darkness, a figure emerged. It moved with a terrible grace, its long, skeletal limbs stretching too far for any human body, its hands ending in sharp, claw-like fingers. Its face, if it could even be called that, was a mass of twisted skin and hollow sockets, and yet, despite the absence of eyes, it seemed to know exactly where they were. Its mouth, wide and impossibly long, curled into a grin that stretched from ear to ear, revealing rows of jagged teeth that gleamed in the dim light. It stepped closer, its presence filling the room like a heavy fog. Mia gasped, stumbling backward, but the thing's gaze, if it could be called that, followed her every movement. It took another step forward, and another, dragging its twisted body across the floor. It didn't make a sound except for its breath, ragged and wet. A sound that was more like a growl than anything human. Noah's mind raced. What was this thing? What was it doing here? It didn't belong. None of it did. Suddenly, the creature lunged. In an instant, its long arms reached out, faster than they could react, grabbing Mia and pulling her toward its gaping mouth. She screamed, a sound so filled with terror that it made Noah's blood run cold. Aaron shouted, diving forward, but the creature was too strong. It held Mia with a grip that made her bones creak, pulling her toward the darkness, its mouth opening, wide, revealing teeth so sharp they seemed to gleam in the dim light. Noah's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let this happen. Not like this. He grabbed a nearby shard of glass from the broken jar on the floor, its edges jagged and sharp. Without thinking, he hurled it at the creature, aiming for its face. The glass flew through the air, shattering with a sickening crack as it struck the creature's skull. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The creature jerked back, its grip loosening on Mia. She tumbled to the floor, gasping for breath, her wide eyes filled with terror. The creature hissed, a sound like 1,000 nails dragging across metal, its mouth opening wider in a grotesque snarl. It stepped back, but only for a second. The whispering grew louder, filling the room with an unbearable hum. The walls seemed to bend, the very ground beneath them shifting as if the room was alive. Noah didn't wait for it to strike again. He grabbed Mia's hand and pulled her toward the stairs. We need to get out of here. Now. Aaron, still, shaken, took her other arm and together, they rushed toward the staircase. The creature screeched behind them, its claws scraping against the stone floor, but they didn't dare look back. The shadows stretched, crawling toward them, but the only thing that mattered was escaping. Escaping before whatever this place was could consume them entirely. They ran up the stairs, each step feeling like an eternity, the whispers growing louder, more frantic, the growls of the creature echoing in the distance. As they reached the top, the door to the cabin slammed open. They didn't hesitate. They dashed into the night, the woods stretching out before them like an endless maze, but they couldn't stop. They had to keep moving. The thing behind them wasn't done. It wasn't done with them yet.